Good afternoon from the beach at Byron Bay. Sometimes I feel like I'm Charlton Heston at the end of the original Planet of the Apes movie, where he's walking along the beach by himself and he suddenly finds the old Statue of Liberty, because I'm often down on this incredible beach by myself, feeling like Charlton Heston. So today I'm going to talk about a couple of things. I'm going to talk about sunlight and prostate cancer. I'm going to talk about melatonin and how it makes cancer less likely to spread and easier to treat. I'm going to talk about the oral microbiome and rheumatoid arthritis. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Elon Musk and what happened with Bitcoin recently and why you want to keep your Bitcoin in your own wallet and not on an exchange. But today what I'm really going to do too is I want to dedicate this video to my old basketball coach in New Zealand, Coach McKean, who died last week of cancer. And it's quite an interesting story how I got to play under Coach McKean, because I mean there's probably 3 areas in the world which I feel that I'm most spiritually connected with, which means to me, I suppose, that I'm most in harmony with nature's rhythms and my connection to Mother Earth, and that would be Nelson in New Zealand, here in Byron where I live now, and Sedona in Arizona. And so the question is, how did I end up playing professional basketball in New Plymouth in New Zealand when my home at that stage was in Nelson? Well, I'd been playing basketball for Nelson, and then I stopped playing for a year when I went off to Auckland to study to be a cardiologist. But after a year I decided I'd missed playing basketball too much, so I decided I'd go back to my hometown of Nelson and start playing again. So I rang up the new coach there and he said, well, not so fast. You can't just walk back into the team. You got to come back and try out. And because I was 24 at the time, I was 26, full of ego, I was like, hell no, I'm not coming back to try out. So then I rang up Coach McKean, who was then coach of, by far and away, the most talented basketball team I ever played with, full of absolute incredible players, the best I've ever played with. Byron Vaitoe, D Shaw, Darren Shaw, Willie Burton, Tyrone Brown, Jacques Tuz. Just an incredible team. So I rang up Coach McKean and I said, you probably don't know me from a bar of soap, but I was thinking I'd like to come and play for your team. And he said, of course, come on down. So that was me just being full of ego, assuming I could ring up and quickly slip into the best team in the country, which fortunately Steve McKean took me on. So I owe him a lot because I had 2 great years in New Plymouth and got to spend time with one hell of a team of athletes and basketball players and learned a lot about myself and motivation and training and working hard when you're surrounded by a group of amazing people, and that bond that you develop with those people that stays with you for your life. I was listening to an All Blacks podcast the other day with Kevin Mialamu, and he said, you know, the friendships that you make from professional sport last for a lifetime, because he said as a hooker of a rugby team, he relied on the 2 players, the 2 props either side of him, to keep him safe during a game. If they didn't do their job, he might break his neck in the scrum. So there is this bond that you get playing sport with your teammates that whatever happens lasts forever. So I'm very grateful for Coach McKean taking me on and putting me into what turned out to be just an absolutely amazing basketball team. So today's video is dedicated to Steve McKean. So if you want to know a little bit more about melatonin and how it works with cancer, if you want to know about vitamin D in cancer, if you want to know about the oral microbiome and rheumatoid arthritis, keep watching. Hang on for the musical break. Right, I'm back. Today's video, of course, based on my two fundamentals. First is that true health comes from living in harmony with nature's rhythms, as consistent with the Gaia theory, which states that all living organisms and their inorganic surroundings, my beautiful inorganic surroundings, have evolved together as a single living system. And also that second one being that Bitcoin is money for the people, by the people, part of the people's revolution. So the first thing I want to talk about is, let's talk about, well, we're here in the sun, so let's talk about vitamin D and prostate cancer. And a study came out last week showing that the men who got the most sunlight, the men the highest, I think it was quartile of sunlight exposure, had a 33% reduction in prostate cancer. And that's primarily through vitamin D. But the important thing to remember is that vitamin D, as has been discussed in several recent studies, is what's called an autocoid. So yes, it's activated in the bloodstream by the effect of UVB light on cholesterol in the bloodstream, but it's also what's called an autocoid, A-U-T-A-C-O-I-D, autocoid, which is a substance which is produced locally and has a very powerful effect in small amounts. And so it's very important to understand that sunlight, some aspects of the spectrum of light that hit our body get absorbed into the body, and that vitamin D is also made locally. So that's why I think it's very important for me to get to a place where I can expose as much skin as I can to the sunlight. I don't know if you can see, but behind me you can see that my shadow is much taller than I am, which means the sun is now, because late in the day, probably not giving me as much UV light as I need, because it's when your shadow is shorter than you that the sun is highest in the sky and you're getting most of the UVB light that you need to produce that vitamin D. So I'm a little bit late in the day now, but it's still very warm, and I'm still getting the other benefits of the sunlight as well. And of course, whenever I'm out in the sun getting its health benefits, I'm protecting and nourishing my skin with my Promethean Health Skin Tonic, which contains some seaweed. The traditionally prepared wild harvested coconut oil that is in there is infused with local seaweed, because we're just starting to discover the incredible skin benefits of seaweed. It's also got a cola in it, which is known as tiger herb in India, because legend has it that it's the herb that tigers roll in when they get skin wounds. So it's full of some incredible essential oils, which most of it was inspired from me working with traditional populations in Niue and Papua New Guinea and the Apache in Arizona. So very important that I protect and nourish my skin, and I get out of the sun when my skin starts to get pink or hot. Second thing I want to talk about with cancer was the role of melatonin. Now this is fascinating, this blew me away. Now the important thing to remember is that cancer, according to the latest scientific research, is caused by a mutation in a cell in its desperate attempt to protect itself from a toxin it's exposed to. So it de-evolves into a more basic life form. It's actually a completely different species. And that species, in its desperate attempt to survive, de-evolves, it starts to grow, and it starts to spread. It starts to send out little babies to ensure survival of the species. And when it de-evolves, it changes its metabolism. It changes metabolism from a aerobic metabolism, which means it uses oxygen like we do. That's called oxidative phosphorylation, which is a very efficient way of producing energy. We produce 38 units of ATP in the mitochondria from oxidative phosphorylation, whereas the cancer cell de-evolves and uses glycolysis and fermentation, but only produces 2 units of ATP because it doesn't use the mitochondria for its energy production. And what we've discovered in this study is that many cancers at night, when melatonin is highest, change back to a more normal cell form, which uses oxidative phosphorylation. And during that time at night, when melatonin is the highest, they are much less likely to grow and much less likely to spread, and therefore they're much more susceptible to being killed off by melatonin, which is one of the molecules we use in our body that actually goes around killing cancer cells. So the take-home message for me from that is to make sure that I maintain my melatonin levels that I produce myself, not only from my pineal gland, but also from my mitochondria, the 1 quadrillion mitochondria in my body. Maintain my own levels as high as possible at night. That occurs between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., which is why I want to be asleep in bed by 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. to get the benefit of that melatonin. And I also want to stop shutting down my own melatonin production by exposing myself to artificial blue light after it gets dark at night, because that blue light coming out of my LED lights in my roof and out of my phone and my computer screen tell my body that it's midday when blue light is its highest, and therefore my body shuts down melatonin production because it goes, shit, I'm not meant to be going to sleep now, it's midday, I thought it was bedtime, I'm an idiot, it's not, it's lunchtime, there's lots of blue light around, okay, I better switch off the melatonin production. Which is why I always go on about wearing blue light blocking glasses and also protecting my skin, because I've got the same receptors for light in my skin as I do in my eyes, so my skin can tell what time it is. So my body uses light and it uses temperature to tell what season of the year it is and what time of the day it is. So we have a circadian clock rhythm for 24 hours, but we also have a seasonal rhythm where we know what season it is, depending on what temperature our surroundings are. And lastly, I want to talk about the oral microbiome and rheumatoid arthritis. Study coming out saying that people with rheumatoid arthritis have abnormal oral microbiomes. The microbiome is the normal resident flora of microbes in our mouths. And the term I use a lot, that we use a lot in science now, is translocation of the microbiome. Translocation of the microbiome. That means that a microbiome that is good for you and healthy in one area of the body, like my gut microbiome, it's healthy for me, it's in my gut, but if I get damage to my gut lining, the mucosa, and I start leaking organisms from my intestinal mucosa into my bloodstream and end up in my brain, which has its own microbiome, but it wants the brain microbiome, not the gut microbiome. If that starts to happen, I'll start to get disease of the brain. So a microbiome that is good in one area of the body might not be good in the other area of the body. So the take-home message from that is to keep our oral microbiome as healthy as possible with good foods and a good teeth and tongue cleaning system, and make sure that we're not getting gum damage, which is going to allow the microbiome of our mouths to escape into our bloodstream and go to other parts of the body. And rheumatoid arthritis ends up in the joints, where you get this inflammatory response to translocation of the oral microbiome. So the important thing for me is tongue scraping has become an incredibly important part of my oral health regime, because that goopy, slimy feeling on our tongues in the morning is the waste products of the oral microbiome that's built up on my tongue. So I make sure first thing in the morning, first thing I do when I wake up is get out of bed, quickly clean my teeth and scrape my tongue to get rid of those waste products. And I also use, shout out to the late great Dr. Roby Mitchell, his tartar sauce, which uses black seed oil and other surfactants to keep the gums healthy and the oral microbiome healthy. So tongue scraping and tartar sauce are two very important ways, and having a very healthy, seasonal, minimally processed local diet to keep my oral microbiome healthy. And finally, Elon Musk. Elon, what did you do? Elon tweeted about Bitcoin and its energy consumption, not realizing that most of it's now moved to renewable energy in the south of China, and not comparing it to the current system of the current financial system. And Bitcoin crashed. But it was interesting that a couple of hours before that tweet came out, I was listening to the Pomp podcast on the way down with the latest Pomp podcast. Can't remember the name of the... Will Clement was the interview with, and he was watching the on-chain statistics and saw a couple of hours before Elon tweeted about Bitcoin and its energy consumption, about 19,000 Bitcoin suddenly were transferred onto exchanges getting ready to sell. So Will and Pomp were wondering if that more people than just Elon knew that he was going to make this tweet. And that's the other important thing I want to talk about Bitcoin, is when people talk about not your keys, not your crypto, it's very important to keep your cryptocurrency in your own wallet. And that also makes me oblivious to minor market movements like what's happening at the moment, because the goal for me is to accumulate as much Bitcoin as I can in my wallet over the next 5, 10, 20 years to, safeguard the future of my family and my children. And so I'm not checking for how many dollars value I've got there. I'm checking to see, do I have a plan in place which can allow me to progressively increase my share of the Bitcoin pool, my share of the store of value. So I don't go in there and look in my wallet, which is where you store your cryptocurrencies, not on an exchange. An exchange is a marketplace where you buy and sell. It's not where you store, it's not a bank. If it's not in your bank, it's not yours. It's somebody else's. In the exchange, you're storing it on the exchange. It's like buying your food and storing it at your grocery shop for the year. We don't do that, we take it home with us. So the goal for me is not how many dollar value I've got on there, because the value of dollars is going down very quickly, but how many Bitcoin have I managed to accumulate in my own wallet. So then I'm oblivious to the minor fluctuations up and down the roller coaster of the cryptocurrency markets, because I know what my goal is long term, not how many dollars have I got in cryptocurrencies tomorrow. It's how many Bitcoin have I got in the next 10, 20 years. All right, that's enough from me for today. I'm going to go have a swim, get in the cold water. It's getting nice and cold now. Sun's starting to go down, so I'm going to start getting exposed to the infrared light from the sun, because it's starting to go down in the sky now, as you can see, and that's going to start, it's moving from blue light to red and infrared light, and that's going to start telling my pineal gland that the sun's about to start going down, so I start getting ready to release that such invaluable melatonin, which is why it's also, sure, I'm not getting as much vitamin D benefit from being out in the late sun, but now I'm getting this signal to my brain to start producing that life-saving melatonin. Peace and love. I'll see you next week. Bye.